Hi everyone, my name is Kitty. Some of you may remember me as the presenter for Space Journey in an earlier panel. For this presentation, Lithium Lessons, I'll be sharing a paper that I wrote exploring decolonial design using a case study about lithium in Bolivia. I would like to start with a territorial land acknowledgement. Our three SFU campuses are based on the shared, unceded, and traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Coquitlam, Kakite, Kwantlen, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. Why does this paper matter? Why should we care about decolonizing design? Well, we're all connected to the SFU community, which is built on stolen lands. Canada has a long history of colonial violence, and this is an ongoing issue. It's not just in the past. As a settler, I want to be mindful of my place in these colonial systems, whether it's the government or SFU as an educational institution, and I want to think about how I benefit from these systems, as well as how we are harmed by colonialism. I would like to give an anecdote about what inspired this research topic. This here is a photo of me at the Vancouver Fringe Festival, a local theater festival where I did a co-op over the summer. I remember during our equity, diversity, and inclusion training, our facilitator asked everyone to think about their role in the organization and at first apply a colonial lens and then a decolonial lens to that work. I was there as a graphic designer, and so a colonial lens on graphic design would involve capitalism. This entails marketing something, catching a viewer's attention in order to sell. But when I apply a decolonial lens, I see graphic design as a community-based celebration of creativity, a way of sharing your art and message. Accessible design, design that promotes understanding, is another way to make these messages clear and further support the community. I thought this was a really interesting exercise because as a CET student, I had never really thought about how I would bring decolonization into my CET degree. And so once I came back from co-op and started taking classes again, I wanted to take this research paper as an opportunity to bring decolonization into my work, both as a designer and an academic. I came across this wonderful paper by the researchers Lizette Rietzma and Light, Tariq Zaman, and Paul Rogers, who were also looking at this question of how do we decolonize design and technology. They conducted a study where they collaborated with the Long Lamai community, a group indigenous to Malaysia. Based on consultations with this community, the researchers came up with a respectful design framework that considers environmentalism and indigenous cultures in the design process. However, what I found lacking in this framework was the idea of how we source materials. They also didn't really talk about land and resource use from an indigenous perspective. For example, if you're designing a chair, you need to make decisions about what materials to use to build that chair. Are you going to use wood, fabric, metal nails? If you're using wood, what kind of trees will need to be chopped down to create this chair? And how do we do that in a sustainable way? From there, I came up with the thesis that Rietzma et al.'s framework can be improved by incorporating indigenous knowledge into the stage of natural resource extraction for designs involving technological hardware. I know I gave the chair example, but think about hardware like your computer, phone, TVs, and where those physical components are coming from. So why focus on lithium? You might be surprised to hear about the political power play surrounding this metal. Lithium is ubiquitous. It's in so many devices. If you use a smartphone or if you drive an electric car, there's a good chance that you're carrying lithium around with you in your batteries. 50 to 70% of the world's lithium can be found in this salt flat in Bolivia, and it's called Salar de Uyuni, which we got a sneak peek of in the title screen. While researching, I came across an interesting story from Aymara legend. Back in the day, volcanoes were able to roam freely. There was a female volcano named Tanupa who had a baby. The other volcanoes got jealous and stole her baby. The gods punished them by pinning the volcanoes down to the earth and Tanupa grieved. Her tears and breast milk flowed to create this salt flat that we see here. And I just find this bananas. I'm borrowing a quote from the paper Anatomy of an AI when I say that we're basically carrying the tears and breast milk of a volcano in our pockets. We're all linked to this Aymara legend through commerce, politics, and power plays. And so from there, what I'm curious about is what would happen if designers of lithium products knew about this legend? How would that change the way that we value these resources and how we make the decision to use lithium in the devices we design? How does this legend change the way that you feel about the devices you use? Another way to incorporate decolonization into design is through government policy. In Bolivia, they adopted this principle of summa camanha into their government. This is an indigenous principle which refers to a harmonious relationship between humans and nature, like we're all living well together. However, geopolitics professor Daniela Sanchez Lopez points out the flaws in how the Bolivian government has not fully acted in accordance with summa camanha. She explains how the extractive economy surrounding lithium actually, and I quote, centralizes decision-making, does not promote transparency, and does not necessarily translate into socially just development, end quote. So while there is a political dialogue here, and that is an important first step, Sanchez Lopez makes it clear that we need to genuinely and actionably incorporate indigenous knowledge into the way we treat the land and harvest resources. Another important thing to think about is power. Sanchez Lopez hints at this power dynamic of human domination over nature, where nature is this thing to be conquered in order to service capitalism. I think there's an opportunity here to cede this power over nature and instead empower indigenous communities by consulting their traditions and learning their processes for sustainably gathering natural resources. On to my final recommendations. I support the framework by Rietzma and colleagues, and I think it presents helpful considerations for designers to keep in mind, but it can be more fully decolonial by considering indigenous methods of sourcing raw materials. For my second point, I encourage designers in particular to learn from the host nations that you're taking from when you create new designs. I've already given this case study of what this decolonization might look like in Bolivia's lithium industry with the Aymara legend and summa camanha. And then just expanding the paper further in the third point, I recognize that indigenous peoples and colonization looks different around the world. Considering that the Long Lamai community is different from the Aymara people, a more robust design framework would be accommodating to the diversity of the world's indigenous groups. Thank you.